Welcome to the Life Happens and Then You Die podcast. This is the Unscheduled Thoughts edition. These are shorter episodes where one of us jumps in to talk about whatever has been taking up way too much space in our brains, hot takes from previous episodes, or just answering questions from our listeners. I am your host, Jessica, and I've had a few interesting conversations lately. Along the way, I've been asked some questions that I thought were way too good not to share. And before we start, I want to make something very clear. These are just my thoughts based on my own experience and perspective. I am not a therapist. I am not a psychologist. I am just a person who's made a lot of mistakes, read a lot of books, and had some really deep conversations, and potentially spent a questionable amount of time trying to understand why people do what they do, mostly myself. So if you disagree with me, that's okay. There's a decent chance future Jessica might disagree with me too. But these are my thoughts today, so let's jump into the first question. Why do I keep falling back into the same patterns? And when I was having this conversation, it really got me thinking. It's something that I'm very familiar with. If you've ever read the books, listened to the podcast, gone to therapy, filled a journal with insights, and then somehow found yourself right back in the same situation 6 months later, wondering what the hell happened, I get it. I've been there too, more times than I care to admit. One of the most frustrating things about personal growth is realizing that understanding something doesn't automatically change it. You can know exactly what's happening, you can recognize the pattern, and then something triggers you and suddenly you're right back in it. Maybe you're asking yourself why you're doing it again, or you're not even asking questions because you're so deep in the pattern that you're just reacting. I think that's where a lot of us get stuck. We assume that awareness should fix the problem, that if we understand it, we should stop doing it. But understanding a pattern and changing a pattern are two completely different things. Something I've learned over the years is that our bodies often notice things before our minds fully catch up. Have you ever gotten a text message and instantly felt your chest tighten? Or had a work meeting pop up with your boss randomly and suddenly your stomach dropped? Or you realize your shoulders were practically touching your ears when you were in this tense moment? Then a few minutes later, you figure out why? There's actually some interesting research behind this. Back in the 1990s, neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux at New York University spent years studying how the brain processes fear and emotional reactions. One of the things his research found was that the amygdala, the part of the brain heavily involved in emotional reactions and threat detection, can begin triggering a response before the more analytical parts of the brain have fully evaluated what's happening, which explains a lot because there have been plenty of times in my life where my body reacted before my brain caught up. That text comes in and my chest tightens, my jaw clenches, my stomach drops, or even the opposite. I wait hours and that text never comes. And then a minute later, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, what exactly am I reacting to? What I've started paying attention to are those physical signs: the tight chest, the clenched jaw, the tense shoulders, that weird pit feeling you get in your stomach. Whatever your version is, I've realized that those sensations are usually information. My body isn't telling me what to do, it's telling me to slow the fuck down. It's basically my nervous system waving a giant red flag saying, hey, something's going on here. Maybe take a minute before you make a decision. I know, that sounds great in theory. It's a hell of a lot harder when you're face to face with someone in the middle of a difficult conversation. Because in those moments, slowing down is usually the last thing we want to do or even think about. We want to react, we want to defend ourselves, we want answers, we want to fix it. One thing that's helped me in buying myself a little time is understanding that I don't need an hour. Sometimes I just need a minute to take a breath. And sometimes it's okay to ask for a minute to be able to process before moving the conversation forward. Most people don't realize that you are allowed to pause before you respond. You don't have to immediately hand over your first emotional reaction. And I found that when I give myself even a little space, I usually respond differently than I would have 30 seconds earlier. If you're struggling with this, I genuinely think it's worth finding something that helps you calm your mind and settle your nervous system. For me, therapy has been one of those things, and if you're open to it, I highly recommend it. And a little sidebar here, it took me decades to get comfortable enough to even consider therapy. For a long time, I thought I could figure things out on my own, read enough books, listen to enough podcasts, think about it long enough, Eventually, I'd solve myself like some complicated puzzle. It turns out that's not really how it works. Sometimes having someone help you untangle your thoughts is incredibly valuable. Not because they're going to fix you, but because they can help you see things you can't always see yourself. And if therapy isn't your thing, that's okay too. There are other ways to slow down and reconnect with yourself. Meditation and breath work works for some people. Journaling, walking and getting outdoors, exploring nature. Something I wanted to try myself but haven't yet is yoga. I've heard a lot of people talk about how much it helps them reconnect with their body, their breathing, and getting out of their head for a while. And really, the specific activity matters less than the outcome. The goal is finding something healthy that creates enough space between the feeling and the reaction, because that's where the choice lives. And the more opportunities we give ourselves to make a conscious choice instead of an automatic one, the more likely we are to respond differently than we did before. I think that's what progress looks like, not becoming a completely different person, never struggling with it again, but catching yourself a little sooner than you used to. Maybe 6 months sooner, 6 days sooner, whatever it is, that's still progress, even if it doesn't always feel like it. Woo, okay, on to question two. I actually have five of these questions that I wanted to answer, but I am talking way more than I expected, so I may not hit all the points I wanted to, but I hope that there is still some valuable information that you take away from each of these questions. All right, so how did you survive such a big life change? I've been asked some version of this question a few times over the last year because I went through a huge shift. I suddenly changed careers, went through it was a whole big thing, and I don't really want to spend the time talking about that right now. Honestly, I want to flip it a little bit because I don't think my experience is particularly unique. The details might be different, but most people eventually go through some version of a major life change: a career change, a breakup, divorce, a move, a friendship ending, a dream changing, a version of your life ending before you were ready for it to end. And if I'm honest, I don't know that I've handled every life change very gracefully. Um, I went through a whole gamut of emotions, and I was completely convinced that I had no idea what I was doing. And I think that's normal. One thing that drives me a little crazy about social media is that people love to skip straight to the lesson, the growth, the transformation, the inspirational quote, the neat little bow we put on things after they've already happened. But when you're actually living through it, sometimes it sucks. You're grieving something. Sometimes you're exhausted. You're trying to figure out who you are after the thing you built part of your identity around disappears. And I think it's okay to say that out loud. Not every difficult season needs to immediately become a life lesson. Sometimes it just needs to be survived. I also want to acknowledge something else here. Not all life changes are created equal. Some are difficult, some are heartbreaking, and some are the kind of losses that change a person forever. I want to be careful here because I don't want this conversation to sound overly simplistic. There are people listening who are navigating things far heavier than a career change or a move. They're carrying grief, real grief, the kind that sits in your chest, the kind that changes the way you see the world. And I don't think it's helpful to throw out inspirational quotes at a pain like that. I don't think it's helpful to tell someone everything happens for a reason. Sometimes terrible things happen. Sometimes life is unfair. There isn't a lesson waiting neatly at the end of it, and I think we should be allowed to acknowledge that. What I do think is possible is learning how to carry what happened without letting it completely define every part of what comes next. There's actually some interesting research around this. I do like to throw in some studies just because I feel like that gives a little validity here. But in 2024, researchers reviewing decades of work on something called psychological flexibility found that one of the strongest indicators of how people navigate adversity isn't toughness, positivity, or pretending everything is okay. It's the ability to acknowledge reality as it is while continuing to move towards the things that matter to them. That doesn't mean being happy about what happened. It doesn't mean approving of it. It doesn't mean being over it. It means learning how to live alongside reality instead of spending all of your energy fighting the fact that it exists. And when I read that, it made a lot of sense to me because surviving change isn't usually about being stronger. It's about being flexible enough to keep moving even when life didn't turn out the way you hoped it would. Something I wish someone would have taught me years ago is that you don't have to stop feeling something for it to stop controlling you. And just like we talked about in the last question, where the goal was to pause long enough to recognize what you're feeling, this is the next part of that, allowing yourself to actually feel it. I think a lot of us assume the goal is to get over it, to stop feeling sad, stop missing them, stop being angry, stop being scared. And then we get frustrated when those feelings stick around longer than we think they should. What therapy taught me was that two things can be true at the same time. We can be grieving and still have moments of joy. You can miss someone and still know moving forward is the right thing to do. You can be scared and still take the next step. Those things aren't contradictions, they're part of being human. And that was a huge shift for me because for a long time I treated emotions like problems that needed to be solved before I was allowed to move forward. If I could just understand it enough, fix it enough, work through it enough, then I could get back to living my life. What I learned is that healing isn't always about getting rid of the feeling. Sometimes it's about making room for it. Not because the feeling disappears, because it stops being the thing making every decision for you. Sometimes you don't wait to live your life until you feel better. Sometimes you learn how to live your life while you're feeling it. Okay, so I am just gonna do one more question. I'm gonna table the rest of them for later just for time's sake. And this question was a little bit of a doozy for me. I think when the discussion was being had, it might have been a little passive aggressive, but that's okay because I think it's a super important question to ask, especially if you're someone like me that has people pleasing tendencies. And the question is, what are you still trying to prove? The more I sit with it, the more I realize I don't know that I've spent my life trying to prove things to other people. I think I've spent a lot more time trying to get reassurance that I was okay, that I was making the right decision, I wasn't about to screw something up, that what I wanted was reasonable, that I could trust myself. I was seeking validation. I needed permission to exist. I spent years shrinking myself without really realizing I was doing it. I hated disappointing people. I worried way too much about what other people would approve of before I even figured out whether I approved of it myself. At some point, I realized I was constantly checking with other people while completely skipping over my own opinion. That's strange to say out loud. You can become so focused on whether everyone else is comfortable with your choices that you never stop to ask whether you're comfortable with them. And looking back, I think I spent more time borrowing confidence from other people than building it for myself. And yes, you may have guessed, I do have some interesting research about this. Psychologists have studied something called contingencies of self worth, which is the idea that people tie their value to things outside of themselves, things like approval, achievement, success, relationships, or what other people think of them. What researchers found is that when our sense of worth depends on those things, our self esteem becomes more fragile because every compliment raises it and every criticism lowers it. That hit me right between the eyes when I read that because I realized I wasn't necessarily building self worth, I was building confidence. And those aren't the same thing. Confidence is situational, it changes. You can feel confident some days and others you don't. Some days you know exactly what you're doing, and sometimes you make it up as you go. Self worth is different. Self worth is believing you still have value when you're having one of those messy days. When you make a mistake, when someone disagrees with you, when something doesn't work out the way you hoped. And I think that's where I get stuck. I keep trying to earn something that should have already belonged to me. Not because anyone told me to, because somewhere along the way I convinced myself that my value was something I had to prove instead of something I already had. I was giving other people power over me. I gave that to them. I made other people's opinions part of my identity. And honestly, I'm still working on that. And I don't want to become someone who doesn't care what people think. I don't know that I ever will. I care about people. I care about relationships and being kind. But I'm learning that there's a difference between listening to someone's opinion and letting it take control of your life. One thing I try to ask myself now when I'm looking for reassurance is if nobody could weigh in on this, what would I do? I don't seek advice or opinions or feedback. I just sit with myself because more often than not, I already know the answer. I just don't always trust myself enough to believe it. And maybe that's what the question has really been about. Not what I'm trying to prove, but whether I trust myself enough to stop asking for permission. All right, I think I have talked enough for today. Thank you for spending some time with me. If any of these questions or thoughts resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've got a question that's been rattling around in your brain lately, send it my way. It might end up in a future episode. If you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to follow, leave a review, share it with someone who might need it, or leave a comment. It really does help us continue growing the podcast and reaching more people. And most importantly, thank you for being here. Life is messy, people are complicated, and most of us are just trying to figure it out as we go, myself included. Until next time, take care of yourself, stay curious, and I will see you in a future episode.